oftentimes when we talk about this issue with Israel and Gaza and the West Bank, the ultimate question is, well, what is the solution? Two solutions that have been presented is the one-state solution or the two-state solution. Now, Joe Biden is now calling for a two-state solution. And Pramila Jayapal is also in agreement with that. Now, I explained to you guys, I'm not sure how a two-state solution would work today because there are too many settlements in the West Bank. So where would they draw the line? We'll get into a little bit of the history. I'll show you some maps. We'll do some jazz and you'll see what I mean. But here is Joe Biden calling for the two-state solution. Shout out to Case Study QB for this clip. Let's go ahead and hear.
I'm not a fortune teller. I can't tell you how long it's going to last. But I can tell you I don't think it ultimately ends until there's a two-state solution. I made it clear to the Israelis I think it's a big mistake for them to think they're going to occupy Gaza and maintain Gaza. I don't think that works.
That was President Biden in the last hour speaking about the ongoing war between Israel and Hamas. While over in Washington, D.C., outside the Democratic National Committee headquarters, U.S. Capitol Police have been making arrests, responding to approximately 150 people who are protesting, calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. Capitol Police claim the protesters were demonstrating illegally and violently. NBC News has not yet verified that claim. This comes as
we already debunked that last night.
24 Democrats in Congress today are calling on President Biden to seek that ceasefire. We write to you, they say, to express deep concern about the intensifying war in Gaza, particularly grave violations against children, and our fear that without an immediate cessation of hostilities and the establishment of a robust bilateral ceasefire, this war will lead to further loss of civilian life and risk dragging the United States into dangerous and unwise conflict with armed groups across the Middle East. Joining me now is one of the members who signed that letter calling for a ceasefire, Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, Democrat of Washington State and leader of the Progressive Caucus in the House. Congresswoman Jayapal, thank you for being here.
I just want to go ahead and tell you guys. So Pramila Jayapal is calling for a ceasefire. I just want to remind you, Bernie Sanders is still refusing to call for a ceasefire.
Let me first just get your reaction to President Biden's statements or his response this evening in California, saying he made it clear to the Israelis that he thinks it's a big mistake for them to think they're going to occupy and maintain Gaza, and reiterating he believes that this ends with a two-state solution.
Well, Alex, I think that was important for him to make it clear that Israel occupying Gaza is not going to help anything. It's only going to make things worse. It's not tolerable from a United States perspective. But I would like to see the president being stronger in his comments. Some of his comments in the past days, frankly, were stronger than I heard tonight. So I think it's going back and forth a little bit. I think it's important for the United States to be clear, as the president has said before, that Israel needs to follow international humanitarian law, that bombing hospitals, bombing refugee camps, preventing water and fuel from entering Gaza is absolutely not following international humanitarian law. We know that there's over 11,000 Palestinians who have already been killed, about 45% of them children. We know that only 20% of the water needs are reaching the Gaza Strip today. We know that hospitals can't operate because they don't have fuel. We know that premature babies, and I'm the mom of a very preemie baby who was born at 26 and a half weeks, 1 pound, 14 ounces. I know what that incubator means for a child's life. We know that babies are dying because their incubators are being taken away. So this is extremely important, not only for the Palestinians and for us to be able to preserve innocent life, civilian life, but also for Israel to be successful in being able to get back hostages. Very, very important to be able to get all the hostages back, to get humanitarian aid in, and to get to that two-state solution that President Biden is talking about. I don't think that happens through further military action. So it's very important that we have a ceasefire, at minimum, a cessation of hostilities that could lead to that negotiated ceasefire so that we can achieve peace and security for Israelis and Palestinians side by side.
I think Oz is correct here when he says she was told to call for a ceasefire. I agree 100%, Oz, because Pramila Jayapal is one of the ones I told you before. She'll say, yes, that's a good idea. But when it's time to actually act, she'll run away because she's afraid. She's another one of those politicians that doesn't want to lose her seat.
We have some images, I think we can pull them up, of Capitol Police in Washington, D.C. I know you're not there at the moment, but they've been making arrests outside the Democratic National Committee headquarters. And I wonder, as a Democrat, if you can talk a little bit about what has been happening inside the party in the context of all of this. There are some Democrats that have signed on to a ceasefire. It is something that has fractured the caucus. We're talking, you're a Democrat talking about the Democratic president. These are protesters in front of the Democratic National Committee headquarters. How have you seen this conversation evolve among Democrats in recent days?
Well, I think it's been very tough. I think that there are a diverse set of views on how we should move forward. I do think everybody wants peace. Everybody believes in a two-state solution or some solution where Israel has security, the right to exist, and Palestinians have security and self-determination as well. And I think it has been extremely difficult for everybody. I will say that...
Pause. I want to tell you something really quick. Have you guys noticed that you didn't hear other politicians saying that the Palestinians have that right for self-determination until, with the exception of some of the members of the squad, until Obama made that statement in that press conference that he had with Pod Save America? Have you noticed that it took Barack Obama making that statement first before more Democrat politicians were willing to come forward and say, yes, the Palestinian people have a right to self-determination? This is why I've said before, it makes you wonder who is really running things behind the scenes.
I think that, for a lot of young people across the country, and I hope that protesters who are out there, listen, I'm an organizer, I've protested many times, but always peacefully. And I would just hope that everybody continues to remember that nonviolent protest is some of the most effective protest. And I hope that we continue to see nonviolent protest because it is part of our democracy for people to be able to express where they are. I do think that the American people are in a very different place, by and large, than where the conversation is right now in Congress. And so there are many of us who have called for a ceasefire, but also many more that are calling for a cessation of hostilities, temporary pauses. In my mind, these are all unified calls for an end to the violence and the ability to stop, de-escalate, and try to get to a solution that we all desperately want. And, I think there are differences of opinion in terms of how we eradicate Hamas, but not that we must eradicate Hamas. That is clear. We all agree on that. I personally think that going in and killing tens of thousands of Palestinians and bombing Gaza completely is not the way to eradicate Hamas. You might be able to take out some leaders, but I've been having a number of conversations, including with the NSC, about our experiences around the world about how you eradicate an ideology in an organization. It is not by bombing. You may have temporary success, but you're actually going to continue to push more and more people towards whatever the next version of Hamas is. So I think it's extremely important that we stop, that we breathe, that we make sure that human beings are being treated, kept alive, and that we're not targeting innocent civilians, and that we acknowledge the tremendous trauma and pain of both Israelis who suffered a horrific attack and Palestinians who are suffering a horrific attack now, with all the history that is behind all of that trauma on both sides.
Let me stop here and just say a couple of things. Number one, the protesters were not being violent. They were peacefully protesting. The police officers showed up and they were the ones that were violent. So I would ask Pramila Jayapal to do a little bit of research. So there's that. And number two, when she's talking about the atrocities that have happened on both sides, I think it is important to remember that the Palestinian people have been suffering since 1948. They didn't just start suffering after October 7th. This has been an ongoing issue of occupation and oppression for the Palestinian people. So if Pramila Jayapal was really about it, she would explain that piece, which she's leaving out. She's saying just enough to try to appear to be progressive, but at the same time, continue to keep her seat. Now, let's talk about the solution. The two-state solution that Joe Biden is proposing. I just want to take you back and show you how we got here, because some people may not remember this, but this was 8 years ago. And I want you to hear what Netanyahu said 8 years ago about a two-state solution. Listen to this.
At Judaism's holiest site, Benjamin Netanyahu gave a prayer of thanks for his political comeback.
I appreciate the decision by Israel's citizens to elect me and my friends against all odds and in the face of powerful forces.
His surprising and crushing victory, the product of an 11th-hour push for right-wing votes, promising there would be no Palestinian state on his watch, and whipping up fear on Facebook with a warning to the base, get out and vote to prevent Arab parties from unseating him.
So did you hear that part? He said there would be no two-state solution on his watch. This was 8 years ago.
The right regime is in danger. The Arab voters are coming in huge amounts to the polls.
But those hard-line statements that saved his job may only deepen his bad blood with the Obama administration, who was privately hoping for his ouster. U.S. officials say they are waiting to see if Netanyahu dials back. If he doesn't, it could be a game changer for both the peace process and U.S.-Israel relations.
Certainly, the fact that he's changed his position has an impact. I'm not going to prejudge what we'll do. The election was yesterday. Those comments were made 2 days ago, so I'm sure we'll continue to discuss.
But Netanyahu is unlikely to reverse course.
His essential concern that Israel withdrawing territory exposes itself to more danger is something he feels in his heart, and he believes that many, probably most Israelis share with him.
How does it make them open to more danger when they're the ones that control the resources, when they're the ones that are empowered? That doesn't make any sense. You know, this is the same idea that this country had, the U.S. had, when slavery ended, when they freed the slaves. There was that same perception that, oh no, white people, white masters, plantation owners, oh no, we might be in danger now because there's all of these slaves here and now they're free. Who has the power? Who controls the resources? We always have to go back to that question. Who is controlling the resources and who is in power?
Republican lawmakers overjoyed at Netanyahu's reelection. Senator Rand Paul tweeting his congratulations, and Senator John McCain calling him the comeback kid. After lobbying Congress and the American people against President Obama's policy toward Iran, Netanyahu is likely headed for another showdown with the White House ahead of the March 31st deadline for a nuclear deal.
This prime minister is way too committed on the Iran issue. It's almost messianic for him, and he's going to want to fight. So there is a real opening there for some continuing tensions over this deal.
Okay. Now, let's fast forward a little bit. Now we're going to go back to a little bit after that. Netanyahu supposedly changed his mind and said, oh, maybe I am open to a two-state solution. But that's not what, one of his comrades here is advocating for in this particular discussion with Mehdi Hassan, back when Mehdi Hassan used to work for Al Jazeera. So hold on to your seats here. This is a little bit of a flashback. Listen to this. So this woman here, she's actually she worked with Netanyahu. She's one of Netanyahu's comrades, obviously here. This is Mehdi Hassan. Watch this. It says two-state solution is not a valid solution right now. This is also 8 years ago. This is after Netanyahu was thinking about changing his mind. Listen to this conversation.
Ayelet Shaked, thanks for joining me on Upfront. Your Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, claims to believe in a two-state solution to the Israel-Palestine conflict. Do you believe in a two-state solution?
My personal view is different from the Prime Minister. I don't think it's a valid solution right now. We tried this solution once when we withdraw till the last inch from Gaza Strip, we got only terrors. The Palestinians, unfortunately, instead of building Gaza Strip as the Singapore of the Middle East, they choose the terror path and just build tunnels to our village and rockets to our towns. I don't think it's a valid solution right now.
So what is your solution?
However, my Prime Minister suggests to Mahmoud Abbas to start talking again without precondition state, and so far we didn't see it happen.
President.
Let me just pause there for a second. So you notice what she said? She said, well, they decided not to build like a Singapore of the Middle East. Instead, they decided to build tunnels. And she said, and attack our towns. Notice how she says that so boldly and so calmly, our towns, leaving out the fact that it was the Palestinians' towns. It was their land. You stole it. Now you want to tell them what to do with the little bit of land that you forced them onto. Think about that.
Obama says he can't see how Israel survives as a democracy without a peace deal, and also says the window is closing on that two-state solution. You're in New York, you've been at the UN. What's your response to President Obama when he says that to Israeli ministers?
Look, the problem in the Middle East is not the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Right now, I think the status quo is the best option for everyone.
Keeping the occupation.
Pause. Did you hear what she said? She said right now the status quo is the best option for everyone. Doesn't that sound similar to the U.S. government? Keeping the status quo, maintaining the status quo. The status quo typically works for the group or the organization that is in power. That's why they always want to maintain the status quo. So you see how there's those similarities there between the state of Israel and the U.S. government, how they want to maintain that status quo. So Mehdi Hassan is going to ask her about the occupation.
This is the best option for everyone.
Keeping the occupation going is the best option for the Palestinians.
It's not occupation, by the way. Judea and Samaria is a territory under dispute. We can talk about it. In Area C, for example, there are 400,000 Jews and 90,000 Arabs. A visible solution is that Israel will annex this area, and Area A and B in the far future will be part of confederation with Jordan.
But they don't want to be part of a confederation with Jordan. They want to
we need to understand what's going on in the Middle East today. The national state, as we know them from Sykes-Picot Agreement, are collapsing. Syria, as we know, is no longer exist. ISIS taking over territories in Iraq, in Syria.
Pause. Then she brings up the issue with ISIS. So I want to make a point here. She said ISIS is taking over parts of Syria and Iraq, different territories there. So I just want to remind you, this issue with ISIS most likely would not have happened if the U.S. government didn't go in and take out Saddam Hussein. Was Saddam Hussein great? No. Saddam Hussein had a lot of issues. But this goes back to U.S. intervention. When the U.S. government went in and they captured Saddam Hussein and they removed him, intervening in another country, removing their leaders, that actually gave way for ISIS. That opened the door for ISIS to come in. Because when Saddam Hussein was there as leader, he was able to keep organizations or groups like that would arise in check. This is what happens when the U.S. government goes in and they remove leaders from other countries. So that's what happened there. So once again, when we even point back to what she's saying about ISIS being in Syria, that all goes back to U.S. intervention and putting their hands in another country's affairs.
Every territory that the West has been withdrawn, Islamic terror. It is, because we tried it once in Gaza.
So
and
you
we
want
got
to rule over the Palestinians forever?
We tried once in Gaza.
Right.
I'm not going to try it again.
So you want to rule over them forever?
You should see what happened around us in the Middle East. And by the way, we are not ruling them. We are not ruling them. There is the Palestinian Authority. They are ruling the Palestinians, and
the world considers the Palestinian territories to be under occupation.
The world, according to the international law, those areas are areas under dispute.
Well, actually, they're under occupation.
According to the UN, the areas are under occupation. But she's not going to mention that, though.
According to the UN. Let me ask you this, Ms. Shaked. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas said at the UN this week that he's no longer bound by any agreements with Israel because he points out that Israel hasn't honoured any of those agreements from Oslo to the roadmap. Why should the Palestinians continue on with this charade of a peace process when there is no peace, there is no process from your end?
Mahmoud Abbas used yesterday the stage in the United Nations in order to spread lies and anti-Semitic statement against Israel that encourage incitement all over this area.
Okay, you're not answering my question. I'm not sure how he was anti-Semitic. But why should he be bound by agreements that Israelis don't honour? You yourself started this interview saying you don't believe in a two-state solution. So why should he honour it?
It's not us that we don't honour the agreement.
You said at the beginning of this interview, Ms. Shaked, I don't believe in a two-state solution.
I said that it's not the right solution. However,
so why should he be bound by it?
Israel government is respecting the agreement that it has been signed.
When you double the number of settlers since Oslo, is that respecting an agreement?
He's referring to the Oslo Accords. So he's saying that you doubled the number of settlements.
Excuse me, there is no agreement in which Israel is not allowed to build in Judea and Samaria.
So the Israelis have never promised not to build settlements.
The Palestinian Authority bypassed their obligation by going to an international forums, and in reality, it doesn't give any results in the field. If Mahmoud Abbas wants to talk to our Prime Minister, he knows how to do it.
You mentioned there's nothing stopping settlements under any agreements. Many would say, let me ask you the question. Let me ask the question, then you can respond.
No.
Okay.
Let me finish the answer.
Please
because
do.
You asked already one question. The Jewish people has rights to settle in Judea and
you say they have
Samaria.
Okay, so let me ask the question then. You've made that point. Let me ask the question then. You say they have rights to settle in what you call Judea and Samaria, the world calls the West Bank. The French judge who led the UN mission in 2013 said that settlements clearly violate the law and could be prosecuted as a war crime at the International Criminal Court. Are you worried about being prosecuted as a war criminal for your support for settlements?
Of course not. As I said, Mahmoud Abbas chose to go to the ICC and choose to attack Israel in those forums, although we have absolutely historical rights.
That's not what the French judge who ran the UN inquiry said.
Listen, it depends who you ask, and it depends which judge you ask. By the way, you know that in Judea and Samaria, Jews are living next to Palestinians in area where they live together.
You say it depends which judge you ask. I mean, the International Court of Justice, various lawyers, the UN Secretary General, they all agree that these are occupied territories and you can't build settlements on them. But let me talk to you about...
Okay, we'll pause and stop it here. Again, that was 8 years ago. Okay, so this was still an issue then. And one of the things that was really troubling to me, so you notice what she continued to say. She did not want two-state solution. But let's go back, because I said we're going to talk a little bit about the history so that people fully understand. How did this come to be in the first place? We have to go back to the Balfour Declaration. That's where this all begins. So this is where Britain actually decided that Palestine would be the place where Jewish people would settle and would have security and safety after World War II. And all we have to do is go back to this letter here. It may not let me go in too far because it's a wiki thing. Sorry. It says, this was November 2nd, 1917. Dear Lord Rothschild, I have much pleasure in conveying to you, on behalf of His Majesty's government, the following declaration of sympathy with Jewish Zionist aspirations, which has been submitted to and approved by the Cabinet. His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. I should be grateful if you would bring this declaration to the knowledge of the Zionist Federation. So this letter is really important. Pay attention to this piece right here. That nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. So that's the other piece of this that obviously was not fulfilled. Again, that is the Balfour Declaration. This statement, this was a public statement, and it was made by the British government in 1917 during the First World War, announcing its support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine, then an Ottoman region with a small minority Jewish population. So that's where we are starting. And then we're going to fast forward to this whole idea of the apartheid issue. And then we're going to get to whether or not this two-state solution would work and why I believe it does not work today. I think the time to do a two-state solution has come and passed because there's too many settlements, particularly in the West Bank. So listen to this from Al Jazeera as they break down what is apartheid.
Apartheid is a loaded word tied to the racist South African regime of white minority rule. But although the word comes from there, apartheid isn't just a description of what happened in South Africa. It's actually a crime against humanity under international law. In 2021, Human Rights Watch accused Israel of carrying out apartheid. It based this accusation on the 1973 Apartheid Convention and the 1998 Rome Statute, which say that 3 elements have to occur for the crime of apartheid to apply. They are an intent by one group to dominate the other, systematic oppression by one racial group over another, and one or more inhumane acts.
So you hear that? Listen to the inhumane acts.
Like denying people the right to leave and to return to their country, expropriation of landed property, and the creation of separate reserves and ghettos.
Pause right there. All 3 of these apply to the Palestinian people: denying people the right to leave and return to their country, expropriation of landed property, and creation of separate reserves and ghettos. All of this applies.
So let's see if any of these apply to Israel's rule over Palestinians.
About half of the people that live here under Israel's rule are Palestinian, and the other half are Jews, like myself.
For those 7 million Israeli Jews, almost the entire land is one space. Whether they're here, 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 or here, they have the same rights, privileges, and legal status. They can move freely, vote in the same elections, and live under the same laws. The boundaries are invisible to them. But for the 7 million Palestinians, the boundaries are very visible. Whereas this is essentially one space for Israelis, Palestinians have been divided into 4 areas.
You see this?
Each area gets a different colored ID card issued by Israel, and your life and rights are determined by that ID card. In Gaza, Palestinians have no freedom of movement and are under a complete Israeli blockade. Israel no longer has soldiers inside Gaza, but it controls every aspect of life from the outside. People in Gaza have no civil or political rights. They've got no say in the Israeli government that controls them. Palestinians in the West Bank also have very limited freedom of movement, with their population divided into 165 disconnected cantons, cut off by Israeli military checkpoints, walls, settlements, and other infrastructure. They also have no civil or political rights in Israel. In East Jerusalem, Palestinians generally have more freedom to move, but Israel can take away their right to live in the city. They can't vote in Israeli elections, And Israel also bars them from taking part in Palestinian politics. Palestinians who are citizens of Israel can travel relatively freely, but they face restrictions on where they can live. They can vote in Israeli elections, but face legalized discrimination. Yara Hawari is a Palestinian with Israeli citizenship.
And the US government is funding and supporting all of this, by the way. So the next time the Democratic Party tries to tell you about voting rights in this country, you should ask them, why are you funding, and they are, why are you funding a country that is limiting voting rights for Palestinian people if you feel so strongly about voting rights?
This ID system, it penetrates, all areas of life, where you live, where you study, what you work, etc. Even the more intimate areas of life, such as who you marry.
That's because for the most part, a Palestinian can't pass on their ID status to their spouse.
And this has huge implications on where they can live. Many indeed actually end up leaving and choosing to live abroad because it is that difficult.
On rare occasions, Palestinians are able to change their ID, but only in one direction.
So for instance, if a Palestinian from East Jerusalem moves somewhere else inside the West Bank, they could lose their residency in East Jerusalem. And Israel, since it's considered that a downgrade, then that's a direction that would be feasible. And further down the line, again, from Israel's perspective, if West Bankers move to the Gaza Strip, then that's a direction that Israel will accept, but not in the opposite direction.
So while Palestinians are granted different rights based on their IDs, nowhere do those rights match those of Israeli Jews.
That's
right.
right.
We can check off at least one of the elements required for apartheid to apply. When Israel was founded in 1948, 700,000 Palestinians had fled or been forced out. The result was that the new state had a Jewish majority. To maintain that majority, Israel has never allowed the refugees to return. The Palestinians who remained were given Israeli citizenship, although they were kept under strict military rule for 19 years. But in 1967, when Israel occupied more lands, including Gaza, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem, it faced a problem. It wanted the land, but didn't want the Palestinians on that land. So it's refused to extend citizenship to the rest of the Palestinians under its control, while keeping them under military rule ever since. To further control the ratio of Palestinians to Israeli Jews, Israel still bans Palestinian refugees and their descendants from moving into any of the territories it controls, while encouraging any Jewish person anywhere in the world to immigrate to Israel, even if they've never set foot there before. In
You see the big difference?
Jerusalem, the Israeli authorities actually have a population target: 60% Jews to 40% Palestinians. Palestinians in Jerusalem are only granted a permanent residency permit, even if they've been living in the city since before Israel was founded.
About 350,000 Palestinians are in that status, and which is Orwellian the way it's defined, because the only thing permanent in permanent residency is that it can actually always be taken away.
These permits can be revoked if a Palestinian moves out of the city, but Jewish Israelis living in Jerusalem never lose residency, even if they move to the other side of the world. This discrimination has been enshrined in Israeli law. The 2018 nation-state law says that Israel is the nation-state of the Jewish people, and that the right to national self-determination in the state of Israel is unique to the Jewish people. That means that even Palestinians with Israeli citizenship aren't considered equal to Jews with Israeli citizenship.
Now, how is that any different when you think about separate but equal in the United States, which was overturned, right? So Plessy versus Ferguson established separate but equal, where Black people and white people would have separate facilities, but that those facilities were supposed to be equal. Obviously, they were not equal. And that case was actually overturned by Brown versus Board of Education, thus leading the way to integration in America. So this is why I like to compare the two, so people can see how there are similarities here. Oh, there's one more piece I want to show here, and then I'm going to tell you the difference between the two state and the one state.
As Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu put it, Israel is not a state of all its citizens, but rather the nation state of the Jewish people, and only them. So let's go back to that list from before. The nation-state law is only one of many Israeli laws that explicitly discriminate against Palestinians. For example, there's the 1950 Absentees Property Law. Deeming Palestinian refugees absentees, Israel seized hundreds of thousands of acres of their land, even though they were only absent because Israel wouldn't let them return. Remember, denying people the right to return to their country is on the list of inhumane acts that legally make up the third element of apartheid.
Imagine if you were born and raised in, let's say, Texas, and you moved from Texas, or let's say you were pushed out because of gentrification. Let's just use that as an example. And you ended up moving to Oklahoma because it was much more cheaper there. Well, then one day you make enough money and you decide you want to go back to Texas, your homeland where you're from, and you want to move back there, but you can't because of who you are. That is specifically what's happening to the Palestinian people. They can't come back. That is one of the elements of apartheid.
There are more Israeli policies that could fall under the category of inhumane acts, especially when it comes to land.
So Israel desires the land, even more so desires empty land or land that it makes empty, and doesn't desire the Palestinians living on that land. And that has resulted in policies in which land is constantly moving in one direction. Land that used to be Palestinian becomes state land, and then that land is allocated for the development of towns and communities for Jewish citizens.
Okay, so that gets to this point.
And yes, expropriation of land is also an inhumane act.
You can see the rest of this on Al Jazeera. I do want to get to the other part of this, the final piece, which is what would the two-state solution look like? And this will explain to you as well why I said I don't think a two-state solution would work today.
A two-state solution is exactly what it says. It would redraw the existing borders and create an Israeli state and a Palestinian state side by side. The roots of it lie in a UN resolution back in 1974. Among other things, it affirmed the Palestinians' right to self-determination without external interference. Over the years, there have been efforts to try to reach that two-state solution. The US has been at the heart of the negotiations. The Oslo Accords, for example, in 1993. The Camp David Summit in the year 2000, which ended without an agreement. And that's because there are some big challenges. Where would you draw the border between the two sides? What would you do about the illegal settlements Israel's been building on the West Bank? And what happens to the Palestinian refugees? And Jerusalem. Both.
I just want to pause here and say something. When he said the Palestinian refugees, you can't be considered a refugee when it's already your home and your land. So the fact that they're even calling Palestinians refugees to me is just, it's crazy.
Sides claim all or part of the city as their capital. Now, Israel and the Palestinians blame each other for failing to reach an agreement. So what's the alternative? Well, there could be a one-state solution. That would include Israel, the Gaza Strip, and the West Bank. Everybody in it would have equal rights. But Palestinians are worried they would lose their national identity, and Israelis are concerned they would be outnumbered by Palestinians.
But this is what happens when you don't have separation of church and state. This is what happens when you have a country that is dominated by one religion, meaning that obviously, if you practice a different religion, you may have issue because the laws are actually attached to the religion. This is one thing I will say. I've always supported separation of church and state because I do not think religion should actually govern a state. I don't think religion should actually be implemented as law over the people. Not everybody is religious. Not everybody practices that religion in particular.
The US, a longtime ally of Israel's, has been a strong supporter of a two-state solution for decades. But President Trump seems to have indicated that as far as the US is now concerned, two states are no longer the only option.
And let's remember, when Donald Trump was in office, he was the one that declared that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. So there's so much to be said there, but I wanted to go through the history a little bit with you guys so you understand how we got here in the first place. And all I have to say is that something does have to be done, though. They cannot continue to go about this way. You cannot continue to treat the Palestinian people this way. And the U.S. government has really, I will say actually the Biden administration, because that's the administration in charge right now, they not only have blood on their hands, but they're going to have a lot to answer to come election time next year, November 2024, because people are not having it. Dwayne says there is no way they can have a two-state solution. Yep. So as you guys saw on the map, like where would they draw the borders now? Thank you, Eric. Nonviolence protects the state. So I will definitely disagree with Jaya Paul here. Thomas says she's not afraid of being prosecuted as a war criminal because she thinks that she is part of the chosen people. Such settler colonial smugness. Thank you, Roger. BDS cancel, Disney Plus cancel, Netflix, Disney Plus garbage anyway. Disney Plus is only good for the Marvel stuff. Like, I'm just keeping it real. That's all I watch. I've watched on there, like Loki, WandaVision. That's pretty much it. Thank you, Goba. This is a 100-year project by the British. The EU and the US to wipe out Arabs in Palestine, take the oil, gas, and the Ben Gurion Canal, or Jurion Canal. Rest is lies. The Oracle says, and a home for the Jews does not mean a state made possible through the displacement of existing populations. There you go. But this all goes back to Britain, the original colonizers, right?